Everyone. So here we are. We are continuing on with chapter 11, and we're going to talk about 11.4 today. Okay, so 11.4 starts on page 501. And looking at 501, it says color to show each fraction, and then circle the greater fraction. Okay, so if we remember back when we first talked about fractions back in chapter 10 and things that we've done in our simple solutions, I'll give you a little example. Okay, so it looks like the first one is split into fourths and you get the fraction 1/4. And then the second one is also split into fourths and we get the fraction 3/4. Okay, so looking at your book, when it says color to show each fraction, well, that's just shading, okay? So I'm going to take my marker, and when it comes to shading, I have to think back to my chapter 10 vocabulary when we talked about what a numerator and a denominator were. And if we remember, the numerator is the part of the fraction that we're looking at or that we're focusing on. So the numerator is going to be the number of equal shares, or in this case, squares, that we shade in. Okay, so I've got 1/4 here, and then I have 3/4, and this one, and then I need to circle the greater fraction. Well, when I'm looking at them both side by side and I'm comparing them, there are more squares shaded in here, so I'm going to circle the 3/4. And that's what all of 11.4 is really talking about, how we're going to compare fractions by looking at the numerator. So the second one right below that gives you 5/6 and 2/6. Again, you have to shade in accordingly, so you would shade in 5 equal shares for the 5/6, and then 2 equal shares for 2/6, and then you would circle the greater one, which is 5/6. When it says construct arguments, explain how you can compare fractions with the same denominator. Well, just like I said, we compare fractions then by looking at the numerator. So whichever number is greater for the numerator, that is going to be your greater fraction. So let's put this into practice. On page 502, it says compare 3/8 and 7/8. One way to solve is by using fraction strips. So let me go ahead and draw out my fraction strips as close as I can get it to look in the book. So it looks like we have, oh, that marker is dead. Okay, so we have one whole, and it has a 1 in it. Okay, so this is just your book's drawing of fraction strips. And then, all right. And then we have 2 sets, and it looks like it says 3/8 here and 7/8 down here. And so that means we have to divide into 8. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Uh-oh. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. Okay. And then inside each, we have 1/8 written. And that's because when we're looking at our denominator, we know that there are going to be 8 equal shares. Mine aren't the most equal, but they're equal in your book. All right, so I've got my 1/8 set. Okay. So one way is to use your fraction strips. The fractions have the same denominator of 8. So 3/1/8 is equivalent to 3/8, and 7/1/8 is equivalent to 7/8. So when it says 3/1/8, they're talking about 3 of the unit fraction 1/8, okay? And then it says we need to shade accordingly. So we will go ahead and do that. So I will shade in 1, 2, 3 of my 3/8, and then 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7/8. So then it says more 1/8 are shaded to show 7/8. And then it says, so 3/8 is less than, that's where we're going to start using that vocabulary, less than, greater than, or equal to, is equal to 7/8. And then we have 3/8, a circle like this, in 7/8. Well, that is where we're going to put our less than or greater than symbols. So we would add our less than symbol. So the arrows are opening up to the greater fraction. So it's opening up to the 7/8. And that's all you need to do. Okay? So that's how you do the one example with the fraction strips. And then it says, another way is when the denominators are the same, the whole is divided into the same number of equal parts. So look at the numerators 3 and 7 to compare. The fraction which has the greater numerator is the greater fraction. Okay, so let me kind of explain what that's saying. So when the denominators are the same, that means the one whole was divided into the same number of equal parts. Just like in our last example, it was divided into 8 equal parts. So since we have that divided into 8 equal parts, so we have 3/8 and 7/8, what the book is saying is look at the numerators. Take the fraction out and just look at the numbers 3 and the number 7, okay? Which is greater? If you're just thinking, well, I know 7's a bigger number than 3. 7 is greater than 3. Well, it's the same thing with the fraction. 7 is the greater numerator, so 7/8 is the bigger fraction. So that's just another way to think about it, okay? So then you have some examples. It looks like 1 through 4, you need to shade accordingly. So make sure that whichever fraction is written first, so it says, it looks like we have 5/6, 5/6, and we're comparing it to 2/6, okay? Since the 5/6 is first, that's the first fraction that you're going to shade. So when we've got our one whole, and then here we're going to divide it into 6. Okay, so I have 6. The 5/6 is first. It's written first, so that's the first that I'm going to shade, is I'm going to shade 5 of my 6 equal parts. And then compared to my 2/6, which would be on the bottom. And then I can there see that 5/6 is greater than 2/6. Okay? Same with the next one, only 1/3 is written first, so you're only going to shade in 1 equal share. And then compared to the 3/3, which is would be shown on the bottom, and you would shade in all 3. And then looking ahead, so 5 through 10 gives you some examples where you don't have to do any shading, and we just have like 2/3 compared to 3/3, and this is what all of your examples 5 through 10 look like. Then I'm just going to have to think, well, they have the same denominator. So I know if they have the same denominator, I just need to compare the numerators. Well, which is bigger, 2 or 3? 3's bigger, so 3/3 is the greater fraction. And that's what they're all going to be looking like. Also, if this seems confusing and you prefer to draw out and shade your fraction strips, you can always do that. That is never a problem. So then looking at 11, where it says number sense, which statements are true, well, you're going to have to think and maybe write out or compare each fraction yourself. And then you're going to circle the answers that are true. For number 12, when it says writing, how can you show 3/8 is less than 6/8? In your own words, you're going to explain to me how you could illustrate that. So are you going to compare them this way? Are you going to draw a picture? Are you going to use your fraction strips? Write for me what you're going to do. 13, they just graphed it a little differently. Okay, so just look at your fraction. Remember how I said the importance of shading in the 5/8 fraction first? So make sure that you're paying attention. If I were to shade 2/3, I would put 2/3 on the top of my fraction bar and then 3/3 on the bottom. So that comes into play there on number 13. And then on page 504, you have your short answer questions. In all of those, it gives you an example of what you can do. So you can model. In the model, it's asking for you to draw your fraction strips or some sort of graph for Newton and Descartes. And then for your explain, it wants to see something like this, okay? Where you're just you're writing out the two fractions and comparing them. 14 through 16, 14 and 15, again, you're really just comparing the two fractions. 16, you're going to have to think a little deeper, okay, as you are trying to figure out how you are walking the greater distance than your friend if you're both going 5/8 of a mile, okay? So that takes a little bit of thinking and drawing out. When we talked about this example in class, I drew it out like a number line and put, so I drew it out like this, and I put the library, and then the school, and then we've got our houses. So it's 5/8 to the library for your house, and then your friend is 5/8 of a mile to school. How can you explain that you walk a greater distance than your friend? Well, this is one way of looking at it. So maybe you can figure it out. Are you walking a greater distance? Does that mean you live further away? Does that mean your friend lives closer to the school? So what could that mean? So those are some options for you. And here's a little doodle to try to help. Okay? So as far as 11.4 goes, that's really all we're doing. You're using your fraction strips to compare and contrast which fraction is greater. Remember, as long as they have the same denominator, we're comparing the numerators. Good luck!